Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm Mayor Greg Fisher and really appreciate everybody being here. We are here today to stand against gun violence and stand for common ground in finding solutions, to call for sane and sensible gun safety and gun responsibility, to stop all this killing by guns. Guns, as of 2020, are now the #1 cause of death for youth, surpassing auto accidents for the first time. That is totally unacceptable, and this horror must stop, and it can stop. Today is a platform for everybody, but especially our youth, for their voices to be heard. Among those here today, I want to thank them for coming out. JCPS, Justice Now students, We Day Kentucky, the ACE Project, Moms Demand Action Kentucky Chapter, Mothers of Murdered Sons and Daughters, known as MOMS, the League of Women Voters, of course, your Louisville Metro government, and your congressional representative as well that we'll be hearing from in a second. LMPD is in the house to support us as well. We thank Chief Erica Shields. The folks that you see at these tables to your right and left can give you a lot more information on how to get involved to end gun violence. Now, this rally is all about taking action about this scourge of horrific gun violence that is unlike any other nation in the world. And we need to put elected officials who are in position to do something about it, but don't do anything about it. We need to put them on notice. You must act now to value the lives of those that you are sworn to protect, and protect them over the gun lobby. It's really a simple choice. Do you value guns or do you value people? Do you value the mass slaughter of young children or assault rifles? It's really that basic. And you are failing in your duty to protect us from gun deaths, whether it's massacres, suicide by gun, or the daily gun deaths in our cities. The elected officials that refuse to act, they flood our country with guns. Then they blame others for the carnage. Shame on you. Shame on you. They are arsonists pretending they're firefighters. We are sick and tired of living with the threat of gun violence. It's an ache and a cry from coast to coast, border to border, and an anger with those in elected positions at the state and federal levels who refuse to act. Can you at least try? Even now, even to keep our kids safe. Guns have invaded every aspect of our lives. Going to the store, to the movies, to a concert, to school, to our houses of worship, in our homes, our streets, in our relationships. This is a nightmare that must stop. And we are here today to say enough. Sandy Hook in 2012 was a horror that no American wanted to revisit, nor did we want to be taken back to Charleston Church, where victims were targeted just for their skin color in 2015, or in our city in 2018 when a man gunned down 2 people at the J-Town Kroger, or in our Commonwealth when a young student opened fire at Marshall County High School, killing 2 and injuring 14 others. Yet here we are again, with innocents murdered at school in Uvalde, Texas, at the grocery store in Buffalo, with weapons designed for war, but bought and carried by young people who aren't allowed by the law to even buy a beer. You've got to be 21 to buy a handgun, but you can be 18 and buy an assault rifle. Does that make any sense? No. It's time to say enough. I talked about 2018 because that was the year that a 19-year-old deranged individual entered the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day and killed 17 people and injured another 17. The Parkland students who survived that horror decided that they were not going to stay quiet. They weren't going to let the deaths of their friends and fellow students go without an effort to keep that from happening to other kids at other schools in the future. And so, March for Our Lives was born to try to change hearts, to try to change minds, and to try to change laws so lives could be saved. And led by our young people, including one who said, it's time for victims to be the change that we need to see. So if you have not been involved with this advocacy before, thank you for coming. It's time to start. And if you have been involved, we got to ramp up the volume. It's time to get louder, more persistent. It is time for change. Now we've got several more speakers, among them, most importantly, young people with important messages. And after our last speaker, we will march a couple blocks south on 6th Street until we get to Martin Luther King Jr. Plaza at the Mazzoli Federal Building. Now we're going to the Federal Building for a reason. That's where Senator Mitch McConnell has his local office. Think about the tens of millions of people across this country that are calling for sensible reform. Think about the fact that over 80% of Americans want some type of reform. And it's wonderful that we're having all this grassroots from the bottom demanding change. But there is one person in the entire country that could make this change happen. And he is the Republican leader of the United States Senate, and that is the U.S. Senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell. So we need to exhort Senator McConnell single-handedly. He could change this debate and get sensible gun reform going in our country. One person. So we must demand that action that has overwhelming support from all Americans, and we must see action from Senator McConnell, the Republican senators in Washington, D.C. So Senator McConnell, we need you to use the immense power you have to save lives, to choose lives, and stand up to the gun lobby.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
And if enough isn't enough, how much is it going to take for there to be enough? How many more people do we have to lose? So after the program at the Federal Building, we're going to march back to these steps for a performance by the Real Young Prodigies. Let's hear it for the Prodigies. But first, let's hear from Soliana Mesfin, a recent graduate of Eastern High School who will be studying sociology and Pan-African studies at U of L. Please welcome Soliana.
I'm also a graduate of Eastern High School, a school where 3 students were shot at a bus stop and 1 was killed earlier in the year. I'm sorry we as youth and allies have to take on this fight, a fight where we have to beg, urge, and plead for our deepest pains to be simply acknowledged, where we have to tirelessly prove that our livelihoods are worthy, and where we are reminded of an emotionally taxing and upsetting reality that is our nation. This is very much pain-invoking, as most of us come here carrying the loss and legacy of a loved one victim to gun violence. We know this pain and system all too well, but we are not stagnant. In every opportunity, we shall continue to denounce perpetrators and systems that enable them to continue. What we are doing today and every day is the answer to liberation that we will obtain for those we mourn and those we welcome. So as youth, as mothers, as sons, as daughters, as uncles, and as neighbors. May we transcend the pain and damage in our communities to continuously advocate alongside one another and demand justice. No matter the narrative or perception, we as youth have the ability to change systems, despite what those in power have to say. The combination of solutions, approaches, and our willingness will directly make strides in securing equitable gun safety laws. The power of our collective action will engrave the notion that youth can and will effectively build a prevention infrastructure that institutions will adopt for years to come. We will lead the effort in community restoration to heal and invest amongst ourselves so that we can feel safe in our schools, safe in our churches, safe walking down the street, and safe living our lives. We are equipped and willing to fight, and we just ask that policymakers do what they were elected to do, which is enforce equitable policies. Enforce equitable policies and ensure that all citizens live in its impact. I urge policymakers to make an effort in valuing, not listening, but valuing the perspectives of victims, survivors, their families, and communities. I urge them to leave behind a rhetoric or agenda that prevents their contribution to the progression of gun control. I urge them to actively seek for updated strategies and establish bipartisan support. And I urge them to recognize the layered and complex reality of gun violence in our communities. We need you to stop prioritizing guns over people. And solely talking about your thoughts and prayers. There are many avenues to recognizing how much of a detriment our current system is. If people in power continue to ignore the urgency, then we will simply vote them out. And if we are unable to vote just yet, we will campaign and raise our voices and work endlessly to replace you with somebody who prioritizes our lives. Yes. We do not have the same seats. Those in power have shiny, elevated seats and fancy buildings. We have seats in a classroom that are designed as a shield in case of an active shooter. We have proven that no matter the seat, anybody has the ability to advocate for the preservation and health of our people. In Louisville, the highest annual toll of youth injured or killed by gunfire was 2021, and that toll is only subject to rise this year. We are in a crisis. We have to understand the nature of Louisville gun violence in order to effectively combat it. We have to establish local policies, solutions, and conduct cross-organizational outreach and support. This requires an effort on all fronts and all perspectives. To my fellow youth, especially those in underserved areas and communities of color, may we rise above an oppressive system. May we fight to dismantle discriminatory policies and practices. May we remain connected in our message, and most of all, may we prioritize our well-being and find solace in this evolving movement of change. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to particularly thank all the young people who are here today. 4 years ago, after the Parkland shooting, the first March for Our Lives occurred in Louisville. It was a miserable day, as I recall, but Greg and I were marching with all these young people, and as we walked up Main Street, we looked at each other and we started to get emotional because we said, there is hope. These young people give us hope. And they give us hope today. Now, some of you know that for the last 4 years, every day that I've gone to work in Congress, I've worn an F on my lapel. That's my F rating, my failing grade from the National Rifle Association, which I proudly wear. Now today, I supersized it for the event. You know, when I wear this, a lot of people say, is that like FU? And I said, when it comes to the NRA, yes it is. You know, Greg mentioned the fact that we've got one guy who happens to live in this community who has single-handedly prevented responsible gun safety legislation from coming to the floor of the United States Senate. We've passed it in the House. We just voted for a package of 7 bills last week that not only are important steps that we can take to prevent gun deaths, not everyone, but how many does it have to prevent before it's worth doing, right? I mean, are 10 enough, 100 enough, 1,000 enough? Anyway, we did that, and with the measures we passed, every one of them is supported by more than 60% of the American people. Some of those proposals upward of 85% of the American people. And most of them even supported by a majority of the NRA membership. And Mitch McConnell won't let them come to a vote on the Senate floor. But let's not overlook our other senator who is not exactly a paragon of virtue on guns either. And we've got a chance to do something this November to Rand Paul. But every day I have to listen to this. There's a sign down there that said, stop the BS or something, which we call BS. We do. And every day when we listen to these people on the floor trying to come up with lame excuses for why they can't support common sense gun safety legislation, your head will spin. Just the latest one, John Thune, South Dakota. Well, my people in South Dakota, they need AR-15s to get rid of the prairie dogs. Prairie dogs are this big. Another Republican U.S. senator says, oh, we need AR-15s to shoot feral pigs in Louisiana. Come on, at least try harder. At least try harder. And this is the biggest thing we have to call BS on. When people say this is about the Second Amendment, this is about the Constitution, call BS. It's not about that. It's about gun sales. This is about gun sales. I have to repeat something that one of my colleagues said the other day. He was challenging Republicans in a hearing, and he said, whose side are you on, the kids or the killers? The kids or the killers? I know which side we're on, and we have to make sure, and we have to pose that question to anybody who tries to defend a position opposing good, common sense gun legislation. So I'm going to keep working. I got not quite 7 months left. One of the things that I was asked the other day, what are some of your big disappointments from your 16 years in Congress? And I said my biggest one is that we haven't been able to do anything on gun safety. I hope that in the next 6.5 months that we can finally get something done. But even if we get something passed, it's not going to be nearly enough. It's not going to be anywhere near what we need to do to address the problem of insanity with guns in this country. So we're going to have to keep fighting, we're going to have to keep marching, and we're going to have to keep raising our voices, because these kids, we don't want these kids to end up like the kids in Uvalde or so many other places. You know, this has become very personal to me. I have a not quite 3-year-old grandson, and I also now have a 1-day-old grandson. And I don't want JD or Rory to have to worry when they go to daycare or school about being gunned down by a lunatic with a weapon that was designed for military use and not for self-protection, not for killing feral pigs or prairie dogs, but to murder human beings. It's time to act. Enough is enough. Thank you all for being here. Let's keep the fight.
Next up is Celante Smith, a Central High School grad who's currently at Kentucky State University, majoring in communications. Celante will offer a spoken word piece he wrote about how a personal experience with gun violence changed his lives.
12 years old in Beach Terrace, the place where they say thugs and drugs is all we are worth. Looking from my lens, I see wisdom and joy in a situation that could be reversed. My mother is struggling, my dad is gone. A statistic is all they see, and they couldn't be more wrong. My first experience of gun life, all too common. OGs out in public doing what they doing, playing dice, trying to scoop up some quick cash to either feed the family or pay a bill. Just moving to survive. Not to anyone's surprise, with the cards that they was dealt and these gun laws that keeps them from reaching success. Tell me, do you see the picture I'm painting? More like changing. And if you come from where I come from, you know how it gets, because pride and ego rules the streets, just like the politics think they rule the weak. Can we speak to the pain of hearing our mothers cry out our name when the body bag is zipped up? OGs getting mad, asking for their paper. Watch your step, young man, because this way leads to danger. And the voices get louder. I notice the mood change like a mood ring, hoping that this don't turn into a new thing. Let me explain. From the people who sees this happen every day. 2 guns, 2 names, 2 families, 1 pain. 1 shot in the stomach, the other shot in the arm. I had a gut feeling that this would go wrong. 1 made it to where I was at. I started to see the imitation of life. See the life given every breath, trying to stay alive, but the one who knows that his life will end on this porch over some white cubes and black dots, and a president who had us slaves and cannot change their ways, but I'm in pain. In this gun life, the one who lives tells the story and is a hero in the hood. But what about the one who dies? And his family has to suffer for the rest of their life. Life is simple. You live to die. But what happens when someone else chooses your time? But in this gun life, life is crazy. Just like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Trayvon Martin. While even dead, their voices speak. Their voices spark a feeling, and when it feels like justice and peace is heard through the streets, but then judges and cops create a bond to get off with a slap of the wrist and then leave us in shambles looking at this with no fear and no remorse. They go back and forget about all the things that they were taught to get to this. See, while they talk a big game and walk a big game, but they don't feel the pain of black mama screaming out their kid's name, and you won't feel ashamed until you go through the pain of losing someone to this gun life. We have continued to press on because our ancestors gave us the courage and power to press on. Just like Nipsey Hussle. The marathon continues, so we continue to run on until we get what's ours. Our minds are clear on what we believe. No justice, 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 no peace. And you know some of these things we can't redeem, but just remember these things while you still have your seat for now. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Rose Smith. She will tell you about the son that she lost to gun violence and how she is working to avoid any other family from having to deal with this incalculable loss. She's a tremendous, tremendous citizen, a great woman. Please welcome Rose Smith.
Mitch, if you hear me, and I hope you do, this is where I have to go to visit my son. This is where I have to go to visit my son. Can y'all join me and let him know that enough is a damn enough? Let's show some love for these students who's able to stand up and take action when our Congress can't. Thank you to these students for taking the lead on trying to do and make things right. Sometimes it's going to take the youth to make change. And for me, I say thank you to all the ones that's out here fighting in this fight. My name is Rose Smith. I am the mother of Corey Ace Crow, age 24, forever 24, a father of one son who was killed October 25th, 2014. His murder is still unsolved. But I refuse to let his death or his life be in vain. I often say on that day, October 24th, my Corey, Ace was his nickname, Ace Crow. On that day, my Ace was fatally injured. But I, his mother, was critically wounded. My Ace got a death sentence, but I got life. Life without my son. Life without my Ace. But I had a choice to make. How am I going to spend my time doing my time? So I was feeling down, went on his Instagram page. And my son, my Ace, had a post on his page that was only meant for me. And on that post it said, every mother on earth birthed a child, except my mother. She birthed a legend. High five, Mom. And I started the ACE Project because, son, that is my promise to you that this will be your legacy. The ACE Project will be your legacy. So after a couple years where my son was murdered, gunned down in a abandoned, boarded up building, a dilapidated building, just nothing going on that was right, I had to make a choice. And I made the choice to purchase the building, to buy it where my son was murdered, where my son was gunned down, and make it a safe place for the community and those impacted by gun violence and trauma so we can have change. We know real change happens when those who need it, lead it. I need it. We need to lead this. We right now, right here today, this is not a moment. I want you to understand, Mitch. I want you to understand, Congress. This is not a moment. This is a movement to save lives because every day in the United States, we lose more than 110 Americans. They are killed with guns, and more than 200 are shot and wounded. Enough is enough. This is not a moment. We are going to have this as a movement, and we will not stop until change comes. How many more mothers have to die? How many more fathers? How many more students and teachers and churchgoers? How many more? Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Then I want to say our lawmakers cannot continue to look away or forget the lives that have been stolen by gun violence. Our message is simple. Don't look away from our country's gun violence crisis. It's time for you to do your job.
Enough is enough.